Hello, this is Alex from cables.gl. I am going to talk about noise texture today, and it seems like a very utilitarian, pretty boring operator, right? But I think there's so much to it that is completely missed. And I was asked to make a tutorial about color and maybe do some colorful stuff. And why not noise texture? Because noise texture is super powered now. It used to be all right, but now we have so many more controls to take it into 32-bit texture world to control point clouds, which I think we will cover in another tutorial, again, specifically with noise texture and what we can do easily with it now. But in this tutorial, I just want to look at the colors that we can quickly generate and use um, in our projects to spice them up, get some weird glitchy effects, get cool color palettes that we might want to, randomly generate and then use in various ways. And I want to cover them all. And of course, I have a bunch of examples to show you. And we're going to start with basically just using the noise texture by itself. And I'll go through all the parameters. And then I'm going to go through all these examples and tell you what exactly am I doing here. And I'm just going to preview all the examples for you right now. So here we're just doing the plasma thing. And we're giving the plasma our own colors because the plasma, of course, does have a RGB mode, but we're recoloring this black and white plasma in a specific way using noise texture operator and a bunch of cool, interesting tricks that I think you'll find useful, and I hope you use in your projects. And then there's this one, which uses very, very tiny, and you might see this a lot in all the examples where I'm using actually quite small textures to get, like a manageable color palette there. I'm not using like 256 color palettes to generate these images for example, for backgrounds or some pattern making or something like that. Um, and in this example, I'm just using that small texture and then repeating it and then warping it a little bit with pixel displacement. And you kind of get pretty cool things. And we'll talk about why this is cool now because before we weren't able to do a specific thing, but it's going to be the seed of the noise. And that's where we're going to talk about that part of the operator. Okay, what else? Here, kind of an interesting effect where I'm using the ChromakeyMaterial, which we haven't seen for a while, and I'm using a very weird thin noise texture to then wrap around this kind of copy of the spray can, and then we have some sort of an effect. I think I was going for something else here with the texture projection. We can take a look at how that looks. But I ended up with this kind of cool effect where we're spinning colors around. Yeah. What else? This one is pretty traditional use of the color map operator, but we're using the noise texture to manipulate those color palettes that we're going to remap from the original image. And the original image is a wonderful Tyrannosaurus Rex that I found on Sketchfab. Of course, all the models that you'll see in these little bits, little projects, I'll link below. Support the artists. These things are incredible. This one, fantastic use of textures and the low poly mesh. I was pretty amazed at how compact this thing is with a lot of really cool animations actually. And all right, back to what we're gonna do. We're gonna do quite a traditional way of recoloring the final image into something funky, and play around with it that way. In this example, I'm doing something really weird, and I hope CFlap is gonna watch this tutorial and say, "What are you doing?" Because I love using PBR Environment with completely incorrect textures for lighting the environment because we can do that. So you see the noise texture is going into the PBR environment light, and then it's set up to use an kind of a non-RGB texture, and then we can easily control the brightness and everything, and get pretty cool little textures that we can use as environment maps with the PBR material. So we'll take a look at that. It's a bit of a weird use case, but I think pretty cool anyway. Just a way to recolor your scene without actually getting into stuff like color remapping and manipulating the actual textures of the model. We can manipulate the environment. And then in this one, I think I'll show you how to, again, color map the texture that is being projected or applied to the material. Pretty simple example. Also, kind of a cool painterly rock that we'll have some fun with a noise texture. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is this noise texture operator? So let's find it. It's called noise texture. And you see that it doesn't have any trigger inputs. It's just by itself. And it has a bunch of inputs for all these settings here, all these parameters. And it outputs a texture, as we can see in this object port, output port. By the way, you might have noticed since the last update, I don't think I talked about it yet, that we can mouse over the different ports and we get a lot more descriptive information about what we get, what we need to put in, and what we get out. So it's pretty cool, actually. So an object, we have a lot of object output ports, input ports, and cables. But here we also have a description, like what type of object is it. So it's a texture object. So you know that you can do maybe like a viz texture, and then you will see what this operator is generating. So this is what we're getting by default. A black and white noise texture. Pretty useful in some instances, but what I'm going to do is kind of specific thing with color textures for use in those examples we just looked at, right? So how am I achieving that stuff? Well, let's look at the parameters. The width is, of course, the width of the texture. The height, again, that's why 256 to 56, we have a 256 equal square texture. Nothing special there. Then we have the filter mode, which is pretty cool, actually, for our use cases, or the use cases I'll show you with my examples. Pretty interesting things you can do with the filter. You can smooth out your colors, smooth out your values. Pretty cool. Or nearest, which is pretty much no filtering. You see it's like completely pixel, sharp pixels. Might also be useful for something you're doing. So again, this stuff is pretty much in every texture operator in cables. Always look out for this filter mode. It's also in the ImageCompose. Quite an important thing to keep track of. You'll see in ImageCompose and the other texture operators, for example, I'll pull one out of the library. This wonderful beach here. This is the texture op. You'll see that it also has a mipmap mode. And mipmap mode is actually quite great when you're using stuff in 3D. But we can achieve that also with the ImageCompose. So we can plug this texture into ImageCompose and then get our mipmap effects onto this texture. So no worries, right? And let me actually connect this to our canvas here. So this black screen is our canvas. And then I'll put down a full screen operator, full screen rectangle, and then connect our noise texture. And now we have our texture mapped onto our canvas. Alrighty, so what else can we do? We have the wrap mode. Again, also we see this a lot in ImageCompose. Wrap lets you scroll the image or maybe tile it on other 3D objects and stuff like that. And then the wrapping mode will clip or clamp to the edge and stop the texture from repeating, or we can have a mirror repeat. Pretty useful stuff. Okay, now we're getting into the actual parameters that are super important for this operator. We have the color mode. By default, it's off. If we turn it on, we get a wonderful random color um, texture here. And then we have the pixel format. And we're going to work with 8-bit today. And in another tutorial that I want to do, we're going to use the full potential of this 32-bit range so we can get colors that are in wild values that then we will use for point clouds or something like that, or positions of our 3D models in 3D space. But on more on that later, right? Then we have a seed, which is an amazing feature that is now in this texture, and I'll try to explain what it is. So a noise seed you might see in other software. If you're familiar with this is exactly what this seed parameter does in cables with the noise texture. You might see it in some other operators. And basically, when seed is 0, then anytime I change any settings on this operator, or I load up the project, for example, I will get a different set of colors or values, because it's not just colors, it's also the black and white mode. They will be randomized, right? And for us to see this really easily, let me just do the height at 1 and then width maybe 5. So right now we have 5 random colors, right? And the seed is 0, so let me flip on color, and then I'll turn off color, and then I'll flip on color, and you see the colors changed because every time we do anything here, it will like always randomize the seed of the texture. And before we weren't able to control this, so it was always random, and it was still an interesting operator, but you wouldn't really be able to control it. But now you can give any sort of number into the seed, and you will get some super random combination of colors. But then when I save and, for example, reload the project, we're going to get the same exact colors back. So that's actually really great to do the stuff I'm going to show you a little bit later. And okay, then moving on, we have the actual kind of value range that we're allowing the colors to be in, right? So for example, I really don't want to see any green anywhere. I can set it to 0, and now I'm working only with red and blue values. But maybe I want it just a little bit, and then I decide, no, I don't want the green values at all, so I can shut them off also with the toggle for each color channel here. See, so now, for example, you might need only blues for something, right? So we can randomize the colors for blue in our texture. So that's how you can toggle the different channels for the texture, but also change the minimum and maximum values that will be chosen in each of these seeds, or as you randomize it with the 0 value. All right, so pretty handy. All right, so let's now get into the use cases. And I'm going to continue using this simple setup first to kind of show you the way I create color palettes, right? So right now I have the width at 50 and height at 1. And why is it this way? The height at 1 is basically all the information we need in our texture to be able to draw one single pixel from the bottom up or whatever, and then populate it with a number of colors that we want. So for example, I want 8 colors, right? So now I have 8 stripes, and actually the texture is super tiny, but it's getting stretched onto our canvas, and we get this wonderful big picture of our noise. And all the different operators I'll show you, they basically only care about, if you're picking colors, they just care about the width, right? That's you'll also notice this with a gradient texture operator, that it's actually generating like a super small 1 pixel high wide, I don't know how many is it, 256 by default, wide gradient with all those colors in there. And then you can manipulate the operator and then move around what color is being used or whatever. So when you're going to be using um, the noise texture up for colors or something like that, keep in mind that you don't actually need to draw it into like a large texture. It doesn't need to be 8 by 8 or anything. Just leave it at 1. So, okay. And then I am going to actually put it into an image compose because I want to show you the different things you can do with image compose to change this color palette. Not by changing the colors, but by changing the positioning and then flipping it and things like that. So I'm going to put down an image compose, and I can stick the noise texture directly into here and maybe manipulate it with different operators that way. But I'm going to just use it the classic way with DrawImage, because the DrawImage has a lot of powerful tools inside it, right? So I'll connect it here and then connect my image compose out into the full screen palette. Sorry, full screen rectangle. And let's look at this DrawImage. You'll see all the way at the bottom of the parameter field, you'll see that the parameter panel, you'll see that there's a bunch of transform functions that we can use. So let's turn this section on. You'll see a bunch of it goes active now, and now we can manipulate the scale of our color palette, so to say. Obviously, on Y values doesn't matter because we have a 1 pixel texture, so we don't need to worry about that. We can try to rotate it. I don't know. Maybe it's a neat way to create like a background or something. Like you can do positive values for the scale, so you get like a repeating pattern of the noise. I think I kind of did this here, right? I have a DrawImage, and then another image compose with a pixel displacement, and I'm basically just putting two image composes against each other with different noise textures, and then I'm getting this funky effect of diagonal lines or zigzagging lines. And then when I click the mouse and the right mouse button, I get different settings and different patterns from just those two tiny textures. So DrawImage, super cool. I think even already you can get like cool wallpapers going, or maybe textures for your 3D walls in your in your first person 3D room that you're building in Cables, right? So actually, you know, in that June updates tutorial or overview video, there was this room that we built, and then I think it has a noise texture projection just like going across half of the room, and I'm pretty sure it was done the same way with a DrawImage and texture projection, right? Maybe, I don't know, but you can imagine putting this on the wall, right? Okay, so back to what we can do with this DrawImage. Sometimes when you're doing things like this traditional color mapping technique, where you're taking a final image, right? This render to texture image of this dinosaur, we are remapping things with this noise texture, and we might get a combination that's pretty interesting, but we need to flip the texture, for example, right? So that's why DrawImage is super handy, because it has these flip buttons, and we can move really quickly our values on this texture into kind of the correct or sort of the spot that we want it to be, right? So for example, what I'm trying to say here is this image of this Tyrannosaurus, it has dark and light values, and the way they're set up makes us believe, okay, that the sun is like above here or something, then he has a shadow, and there's parts of him that are or her are darker. And if we remap these colors to the complete like flipped negative values or something like that, right? The shadow is now white, and where his skin should be shiny, it's now black. It might look a bit weird. It might look cool, but to have this really quick flip to get your random texture into the right space is actually pretty handy. So I recommend playing around with DrawImage to manipulate your color palettes or gradients that you're using with remaps or yeah, other operators that take gradients to just quickly take your image and then flip it and then see, okay, it looks a little bit better. Maybe um, some look really good, some look really bad with these settings, but the extra flip allows us to get into the right mood that we want for our final look, right? So let's look at the other stuff we can do. We can have this position parameter to also push and pull our color palette in the right place. So again, in this example, we can really see what happens when we use the position to find the nice combination of colors that we like. So actually, let me see how many colors I have. I have 9 colors in here. And I think I scaled it so much that I'm actually only getting like a couple of colors. And let me see if I can do a viz texture on this. Um, so you can kind of start to see that everything in this viz texture is getting mapped onto this Tyrannosaurus, right? We have this white part around here somewhere. The background is gray. There's some yellow and there's green. And like it's there. So if we change the size of our gradient here, then we get like a two-tone version of this final image. And then we can use the position to manipulate it a bit better. So for example, here it's maybe flip to be better or something like that. Yeah. So you get a better image in the end. It's not like a super glitched out weird darks are white and all that stuff. So yeah, I again want you to be using this draw image with gradients. It's really cool to manipulate the position, the scaling of it to quickly get into interesting combinations of colors. Okay, well, what else can we do? We can also have other ops. You know, maybe draw image is not what you need, but you can maybe put in a scroll texture. I think it's quite similar actually than the draw image transforms. We have the position, which I think scroll is pretty much the same. But see, you can do it on the entire texture. So maybe that's also quite handy to pick a cool combination of colors for something. Okay, I think we're pretty much like getting what I'm putting down here, right? With using the noise texture as kind of a color palette generator. So let's look at some of these examples and see what we can do in our projects that might benefit from a little bit of experimentation with these colors. Okay, so we have this really cool rock hand painted texture, really nice. I set up PBR material with some directional lights and kind of an interesting use of full screen rectangle, right? This is maybe like a hidden little trick to some people who are sticking around. I think we completely forget that full screen rectangle can be not only at the end of the image compose sequence. It's not only just for showing your post-processed final render, so to say. Like in this example, right, we got a full screen rectangle and then everything is getting drawn to it through render to texture, our 3D scene, into the image compose post-process effect, into the full screen. We can use it as just any other 3D object that then gets stuff put in front of it, right? Pretty cool. You can get really interesting things like it's almost like image compose in 3D space, basically. You can stack these multiple things on top of each other and draw different things with alphas on top of each other. So it's kind of cool. So yeah, a little bit of a tangent, but a little bit of a cool trick that I hope you try out, where you are not just using a clear color for the background, but you can also put in gradients. Or here I have a plasma that's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's the sky, I'm not sure. in the background, and then I'm drawing my 3D scene on top of this. And then I think this directional light is blue, so it's kind of giving a little bit of a interesting effect, as if the sky is in the back and giving a little bit of a shine onto this rock. So it all kind of fits together. But I think this rock is in need of some noise texture manipulation with the color map here, right? So what I have here is this painted rock material that is here, quite nice, but I'm putting it into the ImageCompose and then putting it back into the PBR material, and noise texture is sitting here with a width of 3, height of 1, going to the color map, and we have it set to linear. And now I guess we should look at what this linear and nearest can do for us in the color map use case. So let's turn on color and then turn on nearest. And you see how like this sharp texture is now getting color mapped really harshly on top of our values. It's getting like almost thresholded into place by the color map, because our noise texture is really not blurred or anything like that. And when we turn on linear mode, the texture is now blended a bit, and then the color map has some values in between these. They're actually really hard to see. I'm amazed that the Viz texture isn't showing it, but you get like a really fine gradient between the different colors as they switch from green to dark purple and then to blue. So that's why pay attention to this filter mode and in your gradient or in this noise texture that's generated, because you can get like really harsh effects. So for example, if I put maybe more colors, like 16 colors, I get like a really weird effect here. But if I turn on linear, then it gets all smoothed out and maybe the colors become less sharp. But you get kind of a better way of blending and color mapping this stuff. We can also not just keep it this way. We can get into our ImageCompose and DrawImage way of doing things, because the ImageCompose has nearest, linear, and mipmap modes also, and this like repeat. And of course, we can do all that DrawImage magic to then push and pull our colors into place here. So let me just do it just so everyone who's watching and is still into it gets it like really imprinted in their mind, that don't forget to try out ImageCompose. So ImageCompose, DrawImage, and then we will place this into the DrawImage and then the ImageCompose back into our color map. So what's happening now is actually we can compare what happens inside this ImageCompose. I'll put down this Viz texture, and you see this? That's actually the texture after it's being manipulated with the filter modes inside ImageCompose. So if I turn on nearest, and then here I'll turn on nearest as well, you see that then it's clear to us that we have the super harsh bands of color that are getting mapped to this rock texture that then looks, well, actually we can do some more Viz texturing here. This is our original, and then this is our manipulated texture here. So it's really thresholdy looking kind of effect. We can also smooth this out by maybe doing something like this, going into manual mode for ImageCompose. Let me make this smaller so it's clear what I'm doing in the parameter panel. Going into manual mode and maybe doing something like 1024, and going into mipmap mode and seeing if that had any effect on the harshness of our lines. Let me do 128 by 128, and then maybe let's zoom in somewhere here I believe it's getting smoothed out slowly, but it's kind of hard to see because our rock is a bit small. Let's make it huge. So linear, nearest, and you see that we're not getting like super smooth uh, values like we get when we have a tiny texture. This is a bit tiny. This is a bit too tiny. But like, what do we have here? 8 by 1, right? So 8 by 1, and if we go into linear mode again, we're getting the smoothed out version of it. But if we go into a much higher width, that then this texture gets put into ImageCompose and gets kind of like resized into this larger texture, then we're getting some of that sharpness back into our gradient. So I hope it's clear. Sorry, it took a little bit of a setup here, but basically we're taking that texture and we're making it into a bigger texture, but it's trying to keep all the harshness of those lines, and we're getting not completely smoothed out lines, but some nice kind of sharp effects. So try this out. It's a pretty cool way of smoothing out your textures or gradients in a kind of weird way of manipulating using filter and linear filter and stuff like that. Anyway, kind of an interesting trick. But yeah, then we can of course do all this cool stuff with um, the remaps and position of our colors that might fit our final image better. Alrighty, so that's kind of like a basic cool thing you can do by just remapping the texture of a 3D model and getting some kind of cool um, color palette going. All right, so then I wanted to show you this weird, this kind of weird use case with PBR Environment Light, where I am using a noise texture instead of something common like the way of doing RGBE. I think we talked about in previous tutorials for the PBR material, or trying to maybe manipulate one of these equilateral HDRIs into um, uh, something like a PBR environment that makes sense. I guess I'm trying to say. What we're doing here is we're just taking any sort of colors, and you can do this with any ImageCompose composition that you want. You can give it any texture, right? You can even take that beach image and just pump it into the PBR environment, and then toggle that option that you're not using RGBE um, textures in this PBR environment light. This toggle right here, environment map does not contain RGBE data, and you just flip that on. And if you can, I think, use 32-bit here doesn't make sense because I have 3 colors basically that's being used for this PBR environment light. But if you're maybe drawing something in an ImageCompose that maybe looks like a weird equirectangular texture, then maybe using 32-bit is actually quite nice with PBR environment light. But we're not doing that. We're doing something super weird where we're taking 3 colors in this tiny texture, excuse me, and then using it as an environment light for this cool little pool toy. And it looks actually quite nice, I think, if I do so say myself. But of course, you get like very flat reflections, right? And you kind of miss the coolness of having like realistic reflections on objects, because if you will see me doing the roughness all the way down and metalness all the way up, we're almost getting into kind of cartoon shader stuff. So that's kind of an interesting way of getting that effect, right? So um, we're just generating a really weird environment map for the PBR material, and then remapping all the different reflections to those colors, so we get this kind of cartoony effect. But with smoother effects, we also kind of get an unrealistic effect, but it looks kind of interesting. It's a nice, soft, kind of cartoony feel to it. And of course, we can go to the different seeds and maybe pick an interesting combination of colors for our composition. And yeah, it's kind of hard to to pick stuff because sometimes you're like, no, there's going to be a better composition of colors that I can use. And of course, we can increase the amount of colors to something wild. Um, and then, you know, just what we did, we do all that funky image compose stuff, maybe even distort this image in a weird way to get interesting reflections, because right now it's just lines, right? So and also, don't forget that you can adjust the parallax correction, which is kind of weird, right? Because we're I'm not even sure what we're correcting here, but we're changing the way it reacts to this environment map. And right now it's hard to see, but if we go to like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, we see how this parallax correction is changing our look on our model. So another cool thing that you can do with the PBR environment light and this really funky environment environment with the gradient texture. And of course, we can rotate to maybe get a better shading or like a better look that matches our composition. But yeah, it's kind of a weird use case, but I think try it out because it's so cool to just throw in interesting random colors and use them for um, adjusting the look of your scene. Really cool. Love it. Okay, this I guess we already kind of looked at it, right? There isn't much to this. It's just a really nice model with everything applied the way it should be applied. Um, this guy has some awesome animations. Check them out. And then we're doing this very typical color remap of the final image. So I think we already covered this a lot. So I'm just gonna move on. And okay, yeah, this is kind of a interesting result. I was at first thinking of maybe doing something with this um, spray can on the can itself. I think it was this texture projection with an animated texture projection with a noise texture and texture projection. I think we have a tutorial on this, and yeah, it's pretty fun to do weird effects with gradients with it. Let me just animate this. Actually, I can. Did you know this? Like, you can go to a parameter that you like and drag directly to the parameter, so you don't have to go through here and go, what was it? Rotate Z. You move this around, or you visually see, I was moving this one around. That's the one I want to animate. Just drop it on Rotate Z, and it auto connects. It's such a cool new feature. I always forget to use it. Actually, please use it. It saves a lot of time. Yeah, so here we can add a bunch of colors by just increasing the width, maybe even make a big noise mess on top of it, some kind of cosmic, weird holographic effect with this texture projection. And then the texture projection, kind of like the draw image, has a bunch of different ways of manipulating and mapping your stuff. Definitely check out that tutorial. But I think it's kind of cool to just project a bunch of random colors. It almost reminds me of that old, you remember the old Instagram filters where we would just throw gradients on top of everything? This is kind of the same thing. All right, so what did I end up actually doing? I got this chroma key material, which will remove a chosen color from the incoming texture or from a material that is already on a model. I don't know if we have a tutorial on this. We should have one because I don't want to talk about it. This tutorial will be like 5 hours long. That is interesting, underused operator as well. But yeah, so we have this weird long and thin texture of noise that we're then wrapping all the way around this can. And if we disable the can, you see we got this kind of see-through, interesting mapped texture of this noise going around and around, because we are animating these cool parameters here, the texture offsets. So if we turn them off, it's not animated, and we just get this. But of course, it depends on like how well your 3D model is UV'd, because this operator is for use with 3D objects, and you better have good UVs to have it function correctly. And I didn't really know what we have, so I just threw in this texture, and from some angles, it looks pretty good. We got this linearly filtered set of colors, because if we go into width of 1, then of course they're all connected. There isn't any repetition width-wise, so there's no animation really seen as it's rotating. But of course, for it to scroll up and down, we get this cool effect. But with something like 2, you get an interesting kind of spread between 2 colors with this linear effect. And if we turn off into, if we turn on the nearest mode, then the filtering is kind of off, and we just get this wonderful sharp lines. But yeah, kind of an interesting use case as well. Might be closer to what we will be doing with the noise textures for sort of particle effects or point clouds and all the 3D stuff. And we kind of covered this already in the point cloud from textures tutorial, but we didn't have our noise texture operator in the shape and form that it is now. So we could do like really quick, awesome point clouds with this noise texture now. So I think we'll have another tutorial about that stuff. I hope you enjoyed this. Kind of a weird, long tutorial. I don't know if you want more of this kind of jammy approaches to tutorials. Let me know, please. Or you want like really short ones. I'm not really sure what's best, because, you know, everyone's different, right? All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Hit me up on Discord. Comment below. Come to our meetups. Fantastic stuff lately. A lot of cool things being shown and talked about. We also have, some cool stuff planned in the future. So come by. Bye.